So Peter Oborne is a veteran conservative journalist in this country who has had quite a weird reawakening of left-wing politics. It's very strange to see somebody who's been a conservative for literally all of his life come out so vehemently in support of Jeremy Corbyn and in support of Gaza. So props to him, because he still calls himself a conservative, he still believes himself as a conservative, but fundamentally he looked at the political landscape. There's a great article of his on Middle East Eye, and said, well, given that the main criticism of the Labour Party in the 70s was they're in hock to the trade unions, right? They're being run by the special interest of the trade unions, which is why we had to do neoliberalism. And all that's created is the exact same dynamic, but for supranational corporations and the super rich, right? Where our whole democracy has been prostrated to the interests of a special interest group of rich people, right? If you have to choose between one of those two, which would you choose? Well, it's obvious you choose the former rather than the latter. Probably as a thing that's really kind of undermined the base level of Peter Oborne's kind of conservative economic values. And he's been so pro-Gaza. I mean, he's been very sympathetic to issues that are happening to the Muslim community in this country, especially, and around the world and in the West more broadly. And I think that's given him some solidarity with the Palestinians. And anyway, he's written a bunch of stuff about Keir Starmer's complicity in the genocide in Gaza. And he was on Channel 4's political podcast, The Forecast, to talk to them about the reality of this current government, and indeed the previous government as well, in being complicit in the genocide in Gaza. Rishi Sunak and David Cameron just as guilty of the depravity that Keir Starmer, David Lammy, and now Yvette Cooper are guilty of. And he was invited on to talk about this and debate a Zionist. Let's see what happened when they actually butted heads. It should be pretty interesting.
It's one of the great crimes of the 21st century, and being supported by Britain.
The idea that there is an established pattern of deliberate massacre of civilians, I simply reject.
We cannot become part of a lawless international system which uses mass murder as a weapon of war.
If you're looking at British foreign policy interests and who are the powers in the world that explicitly mean us harm, yeah, Britain has every right to supply arms to Israel.
You're denying Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the United Nations. You have explained very well the British policy of staying alongside our ally, but it's taken us into a moral cesspit.
Hello and welcome to The Forecast. Is the UK government complicit in the destruction of Gaza? That's the assertion in the new book by journalist and polemicist Peter Oborne, with both Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak and many of their ministers under fire for backing what he calls Israel's criminal assault following the Hamas attack of October the 7th. What's more, he says the British media played its part too, colluding with the government as well as misrepresenting or underreporting those voices opposed.
I mean, at the very least, you can't accuse Krishnan Guru Murthy of that. If there's one person that you can't accuse of complicity, it is Krishnan Guru Murthy, who seems to have been the journalist in this country who's done the most to hold Israeli officials to account.
Well, Peter Oborne is with us today, as well as someone who doesn't necessarily agree with many of these arguments. Edmund Fitton-Brown, a former UK ambassador to Yemen, previously a UN monitor, and now a senior fellow at the foreign affairs think tank RUSI. Peter, the book is called
RUSI. Okay, let's have a look. Let's see what RUSI is like. The Royal United Services Institute. So it's chaired by a former Tory MP. RUSI gets its funding from individual members as well as corporate members and revenue from publications and research contracts. Major contributions include the US Department of State, the UK Development Office, the European Commission and BAE Systems. While I'm sure there is certainly no ideological bias that is formed from any of those people who donate to it, I'm sure that the US Department of State and BAE Systems have no material interest in whitewashing Israel's crimes. Incredibly reassuring.
And it's, I mean, you don't hold back, and you believe that there are legal and moral wrongs that the British government has committed.
There certainly are. Well, we start off with the atrocities committed by Hamas, terrible atrocities committed on the 7th of October. And then you look at the British government response, start off maybe with Sunak going there, where he was right. It's a bit like after 9/11, Tony Blair going to Washington. What he didn't do was issue warnings. Because by the time Sunak, it was only about 10 days after the 7th of October, he got there. But by then, Israel had started to pummel Gaza. 5,000 had been killed by the Palestinians, being killed by the end of October, 20,000 by the beginning of January. And whole families were being wiped out. They were it was indiscriminate slaughter and destruction. And I'm sure that Sunak, as Prime Minister, would have been briefed about that. And what he never did was issue a proper warning that we can't back you all the way. And the same was the case with the current Prime Minister, Starmer, who made this remarkable support for collective punishment issue on the Nick Ferrari show. When asked, he was given a quote from one of the Israeli leaders saying, "No fuel, no water," that sort of thing. And
it was the defence minister, wasn't it, who said he was going to cut off Gaza.
And Starmer said, yes, they have that right to do that. Although he sort of said also they must obey international law, but it was a shambles of an answer.
He did qualify it afterwards, didn't he? I mean, they clarified.
He went on supporting it, and his fellow ministers, fellow shadow ministers, supported him for about a week. And then Starmer realised that it had not been a clever thing to say. I mean, it was outrageous.
It's almost like he was not even caring about the reality of the things that he was saying, because the man is completely devoid of principles. He has zero principles. He's like, well, I'll do whatever I need to say to try and make sure people don't think I'm an anti-Semite or whatever because of the smear campaign. There was, oh, well, that made me look silly, didn't it? Just a pathetic individual, Keir Starmer. Pathetic individual.
Say he was supporting war crimes.
But your basic contention is that Britain supported its ally.
Yes, absolutely. But that is the...
Well, yeah, North Korea are supporting that ally when Russia invades Ukraine. It's almost like whether or not that you're part of a geopolitical bloc or you have a geopolitical ally, that doesn't mean you can just ignore international law. Then again, as we all know, international law is only supposed to be used against the global south. It's only supposed to be weaponized. It's only supposed to be weaponized against the global south, not against friends of the unipolar world of the United States of America.
One part of the contention, now that raises the question, profound moral question. You support an ally when they commit war crimes, when they commit what most experts now regard as a genocide. And it is, you have to remember in the context of this conversation we're going to be having for the next half an hour, the enormity.
Like, imagine if people had this reaction. I mean, I suppose they probably did have this reaction, but imagine if people in retrospect would be looking back at the United States' support of Pakistan in their genocide in Bangladesh. Because the US explicitly allowed them to do this and sold them weapons to do this. Suharto explicitly had meetings with Kissinger and with the US president at the time, asking for their blessing and their support for their invasion and then subsequent genocide of East Timor. They went directly to the United States and says, we would like to do this, will you let us, and can we have weapons? And Kissinger said, go right ahead. The United States in both the United States, both in the case of Pakistan and the genocide in Bangladesh, and in the case of Indonesia and the genocide in East Timor, both of them, the US was just supporting an ally. Does that make it okay? Does that make it justified? Don't hear that argument made very often. Yet somehow when it's Israel, oh, we should have to support your allies. You can't criticise allies.
Of the horror which Israel inflicted on Gaza. 20,000 children at least dead, killed by the Israelis. Torture. Look at the condition of Israeli prisons. The destruction of 90% of the housing in Gaza. The shooting of children. the targeting of children, the destruction of the health facilities, of hospitals, of schools. It's one of the great crimes of the 21st century, and being supported by Britain.
Now, throughout this period, of course, Israel said it did not target civilians, it did not target children, it was targeting Hamas, that any civilian death was collateral.
Look at, I mean, you just have to roll your eyes. Like, again, just rolling your eyes. It's the only reaction. The only reaction is an eye roll. Well, Israel said X, Y, Z, right? Like, of course, Guru Murthy is just making sure that he is going through the information so that Peter Oborne can debunk it, right? Like, it's saying, well, what's your response to this? It's a prompt to get a response from Peter Oborne, right? But you've heard it so many times. We've heard it so many times. Israel go, well, we wouldn't do this. Like Daniel Finkelstein going, not the first time we'll talk about him tonight, going, oh, well, the IDF wouldn't have deliberately killed a child. They wouldn't do it, just because essentially the position that a lot of the people on the liberal and right of politics in this country take is, well, I'm a good person, I support Israel, Israel wouldn't do bad things because that would make me bad, so they haven't done it, because I'm a good person, because I support Israel. It's just a certain
damage, that their enemy was not the Palestinian people. And the British government said, both the Conservative and the Labour government had stuck to this line that Israel has the right to defend itself.
Yeah, well, by the way, the Israelis didn't say what you've just claimed they said. For instance, the president of Israel said words to the effect, there are no innocents, everybody's guilty.
There were comments that contradict the position of the government. I'll give you, yeah, of course.
Well, contradict.
From different ministers.
If you look at the statements made as assembled by South Africa in its very powerful case at the International Court of Justice, there was genocidal talk from the top of the Israeli administration right from the start.
So, Edmund, I mean, just take on Peter's basic first contention that the British government should have done more than just offer its support to an ally, that it should have warned much more vociferously about the need to adhere to international law and to not commit war crimes.
Yeah, so I think...
Well, I mean, they kept saying, well, we want international law to be followed. And, of course, the problem is that Israel doesn't listen to words. It listens to money. It listens to influence. It listens to material barriers to their own interests, right? Like, you can plead all you want, it won't get them anywhere. It's like Apu in The Simpsons going up to Mr. Burns and saying, look into your heart, I know you'll stop blocking out the sun. And he presses the release the hounds button, right? Like, Israel doesn't listen to words, it listens to actions, it responds to actions, right? David Cameron and Rishi Sunak said, well, the international law is important. And at no point did Israel care, because it was all empty words.
I would take issue with that, because Britain, in doing that, would have been staking out a unique position in the Western Bloc. It would not have been consistent with what any...
Well, it wouldn't be, because this is the position that countries like Spain and Norway have taken. That countries like Ireland have taken. There are plenty of countries in the West who have taken a position that opposed Israel's genocide. What he means is only countries that matter, i.e. ones that are part of the American hegemon, which is broadly the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. And to a lesser extent, like Italy. Would not have been unique to do so. It just wouldn't have been in the interests of our masters over the US State Department. The reason why Norway, Spain, and Ireland can get away with this is because they are not entirely beholden to the interests of the United States, or at least their leaders aren't.
Of our allies were doing.
Why is that wrong?
So give me a minute.
Yeah.
I mean, I appreciate that there may be times when it is necessary to stake out a unique position if you're absolutely certain that everybody else has got it wrong. But the British government was not certain that
well, it didn't want to be certain. It didn't even bother fucking looking. It didn't care enough to look. David Cameron was asked in the Foreign Affairs Select Committee by Alicia Kearns, do you believe that under international law, Gaza is occupied? He said he didn't know. He was also asked in the next Foreign Affairs Select Committee by the chair, Alicia Kearns, have you received any information in your role as Home Secretary upon whether or not we are allowed to sell arms licenses to Israel because there is a risk of them using them to commit war crimes, which, internally, it was leaked, she knew that they had been given that legal advice they weren't supposed to be selling weapons to Israel. And David Cameron said he didn't know, and that no such thing he can remember passing across his desk. Which is, of course, a fucking lie, right? They didn't want to know, because they wanted to back their power in the region, so they deliberately obscured and obfuscated, rather than actually engaging with the question at hand of, is Israel committing war crimes or not? Let's investigate, let's make sure. And when someone who did give them legal advice told them that they should be cancelling arms licenses, they hid those results, never went public, and then lied in the select committee about those findings, which we now know from those leaked audio of Alicia Kearns. It wasn't about not knowing, it was they didn't want to know, and they actively pushed away information that told them that it was the case, the war crimes were being committed.
That everybody else had got it wrong. And the alliance with Israel does matter. The fact that Israel was responding to an extremely serious, arguably the worst terrorist attack of modern times, that also does matter. And I must take issue.
It's so funny to me, the worst terrorist attack of modern times can only ever refer to acts against Western nations. Like, there have been much worse terror attacks in Africa and in Asia in the modern era, but they don't count because it was brown and black people that were dying. It wasn't an ally of the United States that had their citizens being killed in terror attacks. Like, how many people have died broadly throughout the Kivu conflict, who've been killed in the Democratic Republic of the Congo from terror attacks from like the March 23 movement and things like that, all of the myriad different groups that have been kind of mingling in Western Congo in the kind of broader fallout from the Second Congo War. Like, terrorist attacks been happening very frequently, right? But again, it doesn't matter. Black victims. Like, it's just black victims, so it doesn't matter. Well, let me check. How many people have been killed in the Kivu conflict? 12,000 plus people killed. More than 7.3 million internally displaced. Oh, it's true, more people were killed on 9/11, yeah. But I guess the scale of the attack was different, because it was a large invasion of militants on October the 7th, where the attacks were more destructive on 9/11, but the number of people, the number of militants was much higher on October the 7th.
With one thing which Peter said very specifically about the allegation of genocide. I simply don't accept it, and I don't believe that it is remotely established that there is even a credible indication of genocide.
The UN Commission of Inquiry has already found this. Israel's own human rights organization, B'Tselem, calls it our genocide, right? Like, it is the overwhelming consensus of genocide scholars and human rights organizations. This guy walks in, this guy who's paid up by fucking BAE Systems, comes and goes, what, there's no credible evidence of genocide. The United Nations have said it. The Commission of Inquiry have come out with a very detailed report.
Case of the UK government, they also do not accept that.
Well, the ICJ
allegation.
says there was a plausible case.
They spoke of a plausible case. Also, as you know, the United Nations Commission made a rather more aggressive case against Israel, which they laid out, I think, in September, although all three of those commissioners had actually resigned their position back in July. And if you look at that, it gives you the best possible indication of what Israel is up against in terms of its public relations. And that is that these are three people who had a long-standing conviction against Israel. And they were, when they finally...
Wow, whoa. Hang on a minute. People said bad things about Israel. It's almost like Israel had done things to deserve it. People are negatively polarized towards the country that's engaged in illegal occupation and war crimes and illegal building of settlements and belligerent murders of civilians and journalists and foreign civilians for generations after generations, and land grabs and land thefts and acts of depravity and extrajudicial executions and imprisonment. Wow, I can't believe people might be negatively polarized against the ethno-nationalist state that is practicing apartheid. Wow, whoop. But it's like saying that the UN is biased against Russia because they dislike a country with an internal dictatorship and external belligerence by invading sovereign nations on its doorstep, you know? Like, I can't believe there's such Russophobia coming out of the United Nations, chat.
Let this allegation of genocide drop. It was a sort of a parting shot of a very, very long and completely one-sided campaign. And if you read the report that they wrote, it eliminates all context. Anyone would think that there had never been an attack on Israel and that they had not been having to deal with an extremely complicated...
So you're saying the UN Commission were three people who had a long-standing animosity towards Israel?
Yes.
I mean, Navi Pillay, who's one of the most respected war crimes investigators and judges in the world.
I'm saying exactly that.
Who investigates...
Literally, they're so lost in the source. It's just like, well, the only possible reason that they could be criticizing someone like Israel is because they just have beef for no reason. They just have this completely unexplained beef. I'm like, yeah, if they're a war crimes investigator, if they're a human rights expert, yeah, they have a problem with Israel because it doesn't practice any adherence to human rights or international law. Wow. What a surprise, you know?
Rwanda and everything, and you think she had some sort of bone to pick.
I'm not saying that she was...
It's quite an allegation to make against
I'm not saying that
very well-respected people.
I'm not saying that she was without qualifications. I'm saying that she had a long-standing bias and animus. Well, for example, when Mr. Kathari, one of the other commissioners, spoke about social media being largely controlled by the Jews, she defended him. So there was a long-standing Western concern about Navi Pillay and her bias, or
literally a Western concern. Well, hang on a minute. Hang on a minute. If the concern is genuine, if the concern is actually on bounds of principle, if the concern is because you just don't think that she is engaging in a dispassionate review of the situation, where that concern is coming from should be totally irrelevant. That's some very weird verbiage there to say, oh, there's some Western concern about her. Oh, weird that. It's almost like the concern is actually about the geopolitical nature of her criticisms and not indeed the veracity of her criticisms.
Her lack of objectivity in this matter.
I mean, obviously, I spoke to Navi Pillay about the report, and she makes the case that they came to it sincerely. She's an extremely experienced person, and that she has no bias and no animosity towards Israel at all. And she's very distressed, I think, by allegations such as the one you're making.
By the way, can I just butt in there a little bit? So you're maintaining that that B'Tselem, which is the Israeli human rights organization, which has said it's a genocide, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, all of these organizations and many more, and most of the world's leading genocide experts, such as Mabatov, Avi Schleim in Oxford, and so on, they're wrong, and you're right.
Well, I'm not on my own in this. So yes, I think they're wrong.
Well, by not on my own, i.e. political actors who are aligned with Israel for material geopolitical reasons, also happen to agree with me that adhering to the Genocide Convention would be very detrimental to our interests. Therefore, we are predisposed to disagreeing, right? It's very difficult to get somebody to disagree with something if their paycheck depends on them agreeing with it.
And I think in many cases...
Mind you, you have got David Lammy agrees with you, Keir Starmer agrees with you, David Cameron agreed with you, and Rishi Sunak agreed with you. So luckily, you've got some very distinguished people on your side.
I mean, it's kind of you to say so, Peter. And actually, I would take all of those people as excellent people.
I mean, let's take it as read.
Yeah, his choice of people to be on the side of is David Cameron, the man who turned Libya into slave markets and who killed 300,000 of his own people with austerity, versus internationally renowned human rights scholar and expert Navi Pillay and all of the world's leading genocide scholars. But the MP for Tottenham's on his side, and honestly, what is the international consensus of genocide scholars against David Lammy? But Israel bought him a nice dinner, so... I mean, Saeed Avasi quit the Cameron cabinet because of his opinions on Operation Protective Edge in 2014. Oh my god, Aaron, it's gonna be fucking this. It's gonna be this. It's gonna be so sweet. It's gonna be. I cannot wait to watch David Lammy lose the sea. It's gonna be so good.
You disagree on the question of genocide. Peter thinks that there was a genocide. You think there wasn't.
Yes.
But in terms of your argument of complicity,
Well, no. Well, look, Peter Oborne has so much evidence that it's a genocide from people who are experts in genocide, and the other guy has fucking nothing.
Peter, you derive from the ICJ case that there could even be legal implications for the British government and for British ministers.
I'm quite certain that there will be, and this will happen in due course. In fact, I'm not saying, by the way, that there is a genocide. What I'm saying is that the vast majority of knowledgeable opinion trends that way. If you look at David Cameron's conduct when he became back as Foreign Secretary and the acts which he carried out, one of the most shocking was when Israel produced some basically incredible evidence that UNRWA was heavily involved in the events of October the 7th. They produced this, which has been shown. Today's report from the ICJ shows that's nonsense. And it was long been accepted as nonsense. Cameron accepted it and stopped funding. He paused the British funding.
UNRWA, we should just remind people, is the humanitarian organisation for refugees, which is the main supplier, or had been the main supplier.
It's the main
humanitarian
source
aid,
of
health,
desperately needed humanitarian.
We should say specifically for Palestinian refugees.
For Palestinian refugees.
No, then he carried on supplying arms, and that in the face of growing evidence that Israel, in my view, completely undeniable evidence, even the experts who don't think there's a genocide, accept that Israel has committed atrocities. In face of growing evidence of that, Cameron dismissed alarm within the Foreign Office and he carried on supplying arms. There's many other
or allowing the purchase of arms. It wasn't the British government supplying arms.
Of course, you're exactly. And then we have the matter of using our base in Cyprus to supply Israel, which is quite murky what's actually going on there, the overflights, the diplomatic support, so blocking ceasefire motions in the Security Council, stuff like that, which Britain has done. So we have done, in the early months, we can talk about how things changed a little bit with Labour. Britain was a sort of 100% behind Benjamin Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and co. as they carried out.
So just take on that point, Edmund. I mean, as Peter says, Britain allowed the supply of weapons. It used RAF flights to overfly Gaza. It said to look for the hostages, but it's never been clear what the data was or how you distinguished between where the hostages are and where Hamas fighters might be. Peter's contention is that was aiding and abetting the Israeli military action. Whatever you think it amounted to.
I mean, the Israelis are partners, allies, as you referred to them earlier. They're intelligence partners and to some degree they're military partners. It is worth just widening the lens a little here and remembering that the Israelis are not just fighting on one front. They were also, of course, the Gaza campaign was running for these 2 years, and there was a great deal of rocket fire coming from Gaza as well in the early stages. But you also then had sustained attacks on northern Israel from Hezbollah, Lebanese Hezbollah. And you had effectively it was the latest iteration of the Iranian proxy war against Israel, which I don't think anyone would deny is a reality. And now the Israelis have more or less neutralized the threat from Lebanese Hezbollah for now. They've also, as a indirect result of that, we've seen a change of government in Syria. And we've also seen the war between Israel and Iran, in which the Americans were also partners of the Israelis. And if you're looking at British foreign policy interests and who are the powers in the world that explicitly mean us harm, and of course I would include the Yemeni Houthis in this as well, Britain has every right to supply arms to Israel.
I mean, in which universe do the Houthis mean us harm? Like, not saying that they're good. Don't think you can really have much solidarity with people who have signs that say death to the Jews or whatever it is. Like, but most of what they care about is internal in Yemen. and they have been attacking Israel whilst they've been committing a genocide in Palestine, right? Like, the Houthis don't care about us. Wasn't this guy the fucking ambassador to Yemen? Most of the ire that's come the way of the UK from people in that area of the world has been because of our support of Israel. Like, loads of these countries wouldn't be so negatively polarized against us if we didn't keep helping the people who've been murdering their brethren in the Levant.
Just as our main ally, the United States, continues to do.
And so the aim of RAF flights as well would have been right to help Israeli intelligence.
I have no problem with the British helping Israeli intelligence and military operations.
So just explain then what you think the relationship is. Why is that relationship so important and beneficial to Britain?
I think to a large degree it's related to common enemies. So, the Israelis obviously suffer those threats that I've just mentioned. If you look at those from a British point of view, you could perhaps make a case that Lebanese Hezbollah is marginal, but of course Lebanese Hezbollah took a lot of British hostages, and they have a lot of Allied blood on their hands, American and French blood on their hands as well. The Houthis are obstructing commerce in the Red Sea. Iran has been a consistent...
Yeah, but the disruption of commerce in the Red Sea is a response to the support for Israel, right? Like, again, I don't think you can necessarily say they're doing the right thing, given that they're attacking a bunch of Liberian-flagged ships on their way to Tunisia, and not what they claim is ships on their way to Israel, right? This isn't an Israeli... This hasn't turned into a blockade of Israel. What it has been is just attacks on random people in a lot of cases. So this isn't defensible. And the Houthis and their goals aren't particularly defensible either. But regardless, like, this is a reaction to the genocide. This isn't some long-standing vendetta the Ansar Allah movement has towards Britain specifically.
Enemy of the United Kingdom has been conspiring to murder a British author over decades and has been trying to kill people on the streets of the United Kingdom. The Israelis provide preventive intelligence that has enabled us to stop some of those plots from going ahead.
I would simply say here the Israelis also carried out a number of illegal assassinations. The attack on Iran, which they brought the United States in, was illegal. There hadn't been proper provocation from Iran. Go back to your earlier question. Under the genocide laws, if you aid and abet a genocide, you were then opening yourself up under British law to prosecution.
And again, I'll go back to the case of Bangladesh and East Timor. Like, all the arguments this Rusi guy is saying here make no sense if you just apply it anywhere else. If you go, well, the people of Bangladesh mean XYZ problem for the UK, right? Pakistan protects our interests in the region against, I don't know, some other power that was oppositional, right? They are protecting our interests against the Soviet Union, for example, or protecting American interests against the Soviet Union. Indonesia were protecting our interests in the Pacific. So it's fine to sell weapons to Indonesia and Bangladesh, even if they use those weapons to genocide people in East Timor or in Bangladesh. Like, that's the Kissinger doctrine. He is explicitly making Kissinger doctrine arguments here. But again, they don't make those arguments about Pakistan. They admit that it's a genocide, and they say that it was bad and it shouldn't have been supported. It just happens with Israel. Like, they're the one exception.
And I think this is something which I'm certain that Sunak, Starmer, etc., will have taken advice on it. They have one comfort, which is, although it's perfectly clear that if the ICJ, and it's pretty obvious they eventually will, deem this as being a genocide, there will be a prima facie case to prosecute certain British ministers.
Can I just go in there? Because first of all, I will not accept genocide as a given. I do not.
Pieces of contention is based on if there's a court ruling.
Yeah, if there is, but he keeps saying this is bound to happen. So I want to say that there is no genocide in Gaza, and I don't believe that it will.
Literally, this guy's going, it just doesn't happen, it's not happening. No. Otherwise, my point I've made about selling the weapons would be wrong, and I'm not evil. And therefore things I do aren't evil, therefore the things that would make that condition true, that it's evil, are wrong. It is circular reasoning, It is motivated reasoning. This guy is somebody who works in the interest of the West more broadly and Western geopolitical influence more broadly. That's what he is concerned with, not international law, not the lives of the Palestinians, not indeed the crumbling nature of the international liberal consensus in terms of geopolitics that we've had since 1945. He is not concerned with any of these things. He is concerned broadly with parroting Western interests. And, of course, the interests of his paymasters at the US Department of State and BAE Systems.
There's no legally agreed genocide.
And I don't believe it ever will be legally agreed, and therefore there will be no legal jeopardy for British ministers or British opposition figures.
And again, he's just saying it like it's true. Like, well, there won't be any. It's not happening. Nope, just not true. You're lying. Like, again, it's just... I would be perfectly willing to accept somebody who says that the legal crime of genocide might be too steep to get an explicit conviction on, even if there are suspicions, right? Maybe you could say that. I could definitely see an argument for this, given that when you look at previous genocide cases, like, for example, you look at Bosnia, it was just Srebrenica that was designated a genocide, even though similar acts took place all across Bosnia and Herzegovina during the 1990s, right? During the war. There were plenty of genocidal acts, but the only part of the war that's actually considered a genocide legally is what happened in Srebrenica. Although it's known as the Bosnian genocide, it is specifically a genocide in Srebrenica, because that was the only place where it was deemed to have happened. It's a difficult crime to be able to get a conviction for, because of all of the different things that you need to be able to prove. So there is a potential that it won't be found to be a genocide, because the bar for deciding that it is legally is too high. But in terms of the broader understanding of genocide, it's unquestionable at this point.
For that. But the other point that I want to make is that the United Kingdom, in my view, has calibrated its approach to this conflict reasonably judiciously. I don't always agree with them, by the way. You know, you will probably find me more pro-Israeli than either David Lammy or Keir Starmer. But the fact of the matter is that the Labour government...
Well, whilst Keir Starmer and David Lammy are certainly very pro-Israel, what they have done throughout the entire conflict, throughout the entire genocide, is take the position that they think is the most electorally feasible that they can get away with, basically. Because the public in this country is overwhelmingly pro-Palestine, when you look at the internal polling by, like, YouGov. So they have to try and at least pretend to be pro-Palestine, whilst fundamentally still flying flights to Gaza from RAF Akrotiri, and for allowing 94% or whatever it is of the arms licenses to continue to be granted to be sold to Israel. Because the things they've actually done to try and curry favour with the public are meaningless, like recognising a Palestinian state that's already been obliterated, or sanctioning the settler that people remember from the Louis Theroux documentary, or sanctioning the settler that they remember... Fuck's sake, I can't speak. Or sanctioning the settler from the Louis Theroux documentary that everyone remembers, you know? Like, real virtue signal stuff that doesn't materially impact the conflict. I mean, David Lammy even said that the arms licenses they were cancelling wouldn't materially affect the conflict at all. Wouldn't materially affect Israel's ability to prosecute the genocide, right? That was David Lammy's explicit case and why they were okay. They were okay to do it just this once, just as a treat.
Has continually monitored this conflict in a critical way and has sought to influence it, including trying to influence the Israelis to an early ceasefire. And that includes what I consider to have been the misguided policy of recognizing the state of Palestine.
Peter, I mean, the almost the most important point that Edmund is making is, because they are our allies, because they are strategically in the same place as we are in the Middle East, helping Israel was the right thing to do.
Yes, I'm Mr. Fitton-Brown, when you were ambassador to the Yemen, I went to Yemen in 2016 and saw, when you were ambassador, I dare say you were in Riyadh.
No, I was in Jeddah.
Jeddah. I saw a humanitarian catastrophe visited on Yemen by, again, British-backed bombing. I saw the bombing of hospitals. I saw the slaughter of civilians. There you are in Jeddah. And I also, because I'm part of an investigative journalist, I learned of the deep concern inside the Foreign Office, then as now, that Britain was party to war crimes. What is your position? You have a record here of supporting the mass slaughter of Arabs. And you did this in Yemen.
It's true. It's true. Thank you, StuTech, for the 5 gifted. Fundamentally true. I mean, there was for quite a while, we had a pause on weapons shipments to Saudi Arabia. Restarted by Liz Truss, by the way, in her position as Foreign Secretary. Oh, no, she's not Foreign Secretary. She was in some role. What was it? What role was she in? But she was in a role that restarted the sale of arms to Saudi Arabia. International... Oh, she was fucking Foreign Secretary. Like, she was Foreign Secretary in 2021. Fuck me. What is this country?
As British, I'm sorry, it's a very serious matter. It isn't something you should laugh about.
No, it's a laughable accusation.
It is the slaughter of Arabs in the Yemen, and now the slaughter of Arabs in Gaza. These are two. You have defended British government policies in each case. And I find it very troubling and morally wrong and morally atrocious and deeply shaming for our country that we should support that kind of conduct, and brings us deeply into disrepute across the world.
No word of a lie. Not a single word of a lie. Again, the reason why we are living in a dangerous world is because all of the people who Mr. Fitton Brown would claim to be enemies know that there is no standard that they need to be held to anymore. There is no standard they need to be held to. They can't be denounced as terrorists anymore, because terroristic acts, atrocious acts, genocidal acts are perfectly okay as long as you're on the side of the West. There is no level to which that we can call ourselves superior. Not that we ever were, necessarily, but we like to think about... The West likes to think of itself as superior. And that we provide, or that we provided, a moral basis that was worth emulating around the world. That's dead and buried. That's gone. What little of that remained up until 2 years ago has gone. It's gone forever and will never come back. And our enemies, and broadly people who have nefarious interests and desires, can take credence in the fact that it doesn't matter anymore what international law says. It doesn't matter about the norms of conflict and geopolitics. It doesn't matter because it's meaningless. It's meaningless because when it was really important, when there was a genocide happening in Palestine, Western countries looked the other way. And that's the big problem here. The international legal agreements that have kept lots of the world, not all of the world, of course, safe since 1945 have been incinerated in the space of 2 years. Do I rate Oborne, NJ? I think Oborne is fantastic, yeah. He's a man of incredible amounts of integrity. Incredible amounts of integrity. I have the utmost respect for Peter Oborne. The utmost respect.
We're going a long way out from your book and Gaza, but yeah, let's go there. Why not? My horror at the abuse of the population of Yemen and the systematic and deliberate cruelty, including slaughter, of the population of Yemen by the Houthis
I was there and you weren't. You were in Jeddah, from Riyadh, the Saudis were bombing the Yemen. I spoke to a lot of ordinary Yemeni people. I was hardly with. They were supporting the Houthis because they saw the atrocities being carried out against them by the Saudis, supported by Britain.
The Houthis.
And so you have no knowledge of what the ordinary people of Yemen were saying, because even though you were the ambassador, you weren't actually there.
But I am in contact with many ordinary Yemenis and still am. And you know the important. I mean, I love the way that you imply that the Houthis were they somehow morphed rapidly into just being the honest representatives.
I didn't
of the
say
Yemeni
that. You're
people.
misrepresenting what I said. Right. I said that of course, the Houthis have done terrible things and continue to do them. But the ordinary people of Yemen were so horrified because they were being slaughtered by.
There's no doubt, is there, that there was a blockade that was imposed by the Saudi-led coalition. I also reported from the Houthi run part of Yemen in 2016, and I saw babies starving to death because there was no food and there was no economy.
And we were very much engaged in humanitarian.
Like Gaza, some people will say, well, it was all the Houthis' fault, as people say, well, it's all Hamas's fault, and other people will say, well, there's a conflict here, and the people who are imposing the blockade, as in Gaza, are also responsible for the impact of that.
Let's try to narrow this, because I mean, if we get really deep into Yemen, we are going an awfully long way off the point. But let's try to go into the point about British complicity, because I think that seems to be the nub of what Peter is saying. The British government and the American government at that time were deeply involved in trying to make the Saudis as discriminating, as careful, as professional as possible.
I mean, didn't work very well, though, did it? Again, because just like Israel, they respond to material concerns, not ideological ones. They don't respond to words. All of that time spent trying to get Saudi Arabia to be discriminating failed miserably, because it was, I mean, one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes preceding the genocide in Gaza. It was horrific. It's absolutely horrific, right? And all of those niceties, all of that time trying to spend getting the Saudis on side, they did incredible crimes against the regular people of Yemen. And they murdered Jamal Khashoggi.
In conducting a war that, let's not forget, was endorsed by the United Nations in the face of the illegal Houthi occupation of Sana'a.
I mean, there is a similarity in the argument, but I think we should get back to Gaza, because that's really what we're trying to sort of hone in on. I mean, how do you think, Peter, you've mentioned a couple of instances of things politicians said, Keir Starmer on the radio, David Cameron, but what are you actually saying about our responsibility as a nation for the killing and the starvation in Gaza?
Well, first of all,
that we haven't noticed, because this is a conversation. This conversation doesn't play out on the media very much, but it's a conversation that happens, I think, a lot in Britain. To what extent are we to blame, as well? And your book is all about that. So why do you think it's systematic rather than amounting to a few supportive comments?
Well, hang on. It's not supportive comments. I've mentioned the Cameron's defunding of UNRWA. I've mentioned the British arms going there, etc., etc. Look, if the massacres which took place in Gaza and are still taking place, even despite the ceasefire, had been carried out by Russia in Ukraine on this scale, or let's even think, we would have done the following things. We would have sanctioned, when we do in Russia, as we have done in Russia, we would have sanctioned Israel.
Thank you, JFK Rotting, for the raid. Welcome in, Raiders. You're through to the No Justice stream. We talk about UK politics from a socialist perspective 6 days a week. If that sounds like your thing, please consider dropping a follow. Please consider subscribing on the YouTube at No Justice MTG as well. Please consider following and subscribing. It is free to follow and subscribe on Twitch and YouTube. Please do, please do, please do. Everyone in my chat, please go to twitch.tv/JFK_rotting and drop a follow for some more based content over there. Thank you very much for the raid. We're currently watching a debate between a think tank that's funded by BAE Systems and the American State Department, a representative of that think tank, debating conservative journalist, pro-Palestinian conservative journalist Peter Oborne, about a book he's written about complicity of the West in the genocide in Gaza.
I would have, there was a very strong case for a no-fly zone over Gaza, and the F-35s are just bombing the place to smithereens and slaughtering people, that we would have set up a war crimes tribunal. These are all things. Now, you say it's because Israel is our ally that we shouldn't do them. I say one of the reasons we should do them is because Israel is our ally. We cannot become part of a lawless international system which uses mass murder as a weapon of war, starvation as a weapon of war. We can't do that. That isn't what we as a nation stand for. And I'm surprised, I'm quite shocked, actually, to hear a former British diplomat defend that kind of conduct.
So once again, I don't accept your premise in many of this. The idea that there is an established pattern of deliberate massacre of civilians, I simply reject.
Well, yeah, because you're looking with your fucking feet, mate. There has been plenty of evidence proving that this is the case. plenty of evidence.
Well documented by all of the human rights organisations, by the UN. This is a matter of we're now
just let Edmund make his point.
Yeah, that would be nice. Yes, let's at least look at the company that we are in. We are not talking about just being in, some level of coordination with the United States, which is part of this. It's partly the British foreign policy over many years, of course, has been, partly about a close relationship with the United States. Now, that's just a fact of the matter. I'm sure you can make objections to it, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with those objections, but that is a guiding principle that both of our political parties have accepted over decades. But
well, interestingly, there's not going to be both of our political parties for much longer. If current electoral results continue as they are, we will not have a political system of two parties that are in lockstep with the US foreign policy. We will have one political party that is essentially just a proxy organisation of the United States and Reform UK, and an internationalist, anti-Atlanticist party in the Green Party. Maybe people are sick of this,
It isn't just the United States. We're also very much in step with Germany on this. We're very much in step with Japan on this. We're very much in step with France on this. There is no international unanimity, certainly not in the West, against British policy on Gaza.
And yet,
weird, isn't it? Hold it one sec. Hold on to that thought, right? Well, there certainly isn't any opposition to Britain's policy in the West. Oh, funny that. It's almost like Israel is an outpost for the West in the Middle East, and there's a material interest in keeping that stationary aircraft carrier afloat. Wow. What was it Joe Biden says? If Israel didn't exist, America would have to invent an Israel to protect Western interests in the region. Yeah, Japan and Germany, countries famous for never committing war crimes. Literally. And again, there are plenty of countries in the West that have opposed our position on this. Ireland, Spain, Norway. Come on. Whoa, US vassal states are on board. What a shock. Crazy, isn't it?
all of these countries, their positions evolved over time, and particularly Britain's position,
as did ours,
and started saying, this is unacceptable. The level of killing is horrific. There's got to be a ceasefire. Eventually, they got to calling for a ceasefire, even though they rejected the idea of calling for a ceasefire at the beginning. And yet, for all the allyship that you talk of, they were unable to affect any change in Israel's behaviour at all.
Well, so you're exactly as you say. The evolution of policy is what you would expect to see. You would expect any Western country, sensitive to its own electorate, sensitive to international dynamics, to look at this and to say, this has to stop. And people have been saying that, that we need to get to an off-ramp as soon as possible. It isn't only the Israelis who had to stop. Hamas were also part of this equation. They have been all the way through. And of course, they are still avowedly committed to the destruction of Israel. They haven't changed their fundamental position. And they have said on the record multiple times that what they're looking for is not a peace agreement with Israel. It's a ceasefire that will enable them to regroup and to carry out another October the 7th when the chance arises again. So the evolution...
a misrepresentation of the Hamas position.
You think they're looking for a peace agreement with Israel?
Yes, they are. They've been quite, what has been tragic is again and again, and one of the things which has been tragic in the course of this carnage has been that there have been peace movements towards peace which have been blocked by Netanyahu, particularly when he breached the ceasefire in March this year. And actually going back before October the 7th, it was the political leadership has been sending out messages. It's ready to talk and ready actually to recognize the state of Israel. So you mustn't you're overstating the position, and you mustn't misrepresent it because you're presenting it as there can be no solution.
I'm directly quoting what a number of Hamas leaders have said.
Yeah, but we know, and you know actually, because you're a British diplomat, that Hamas has been saying other things and frequently has said other things. And we must pursue peace and not the carrying on this. I mean,
we are pursuing peace.
The thing is, in the original ceasefire agreement from earlier this year, Hamas were ready to relinquish control of Gaza then anyway. At least that's what Osama Hamdan was saying. I mean, of course, there are so many different opinions now in terms of the leadership of Hamas, given that so many of the current, or at least most recent crop of leaders during the latest round of hostilities have all been killed by Israel, right? There's no unified Hamas position anymore. But Osama Hamdan was high up before. He is still high up now. And he was saying that they were ready to relinquish control of Gaza earlier this year, during the first ceasefire that Israel broke. Because the Likud Charter doesn't say anything about Israel being the only nation between the river and the sea, does it? Pure hypocrisy. Well, exactly, yeah, well, exactly. Maybe it could have been negotiated more quickly if Israel didn't stop murdering head negotiators. Also very true.
And Donald Trump has actually produced a peace plan, which has actually done something meaningful.
Well, yeah, because he put conditions on Israel. It's really simple. The whole time, all it took was one phone call. All it took was one visit from Steve Witkoff. That's all that was necessary to end the genocide, was the United States president going, no, actually, you're not allowed anymore, attack dog in the region. Stop. Bad dog. And it would have all ended. And it would have all been over. But Biden didn't do it because he's a fanatical Zionist.
And Britain has supported it.
He's produced a ceasefire.
He's produced a peace plan.
It's not a peace plan, and if you've studied the 20 points, you understand that perfectly well. He's produced a ceasefire, and of course, hopefully this will move towards a peace. But I think that this is the genocide or the carnage is such. The Economist estimates that between 4 to 5% of the population of Gaza has been killed. That's probably about 100,000 people. Others think it's more. If that was in Britain, that would be about 3 million of us.
So I don't accept that figure either.
You don't accept this figure, I know. There's a lot of facts which you find difficult to accept. You're in a state of denial. But
many people talk about between 60 and 70,000
you're denying Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the United Nations. You're in a small place, along with you, Mr. Netanyahu, perhaps Ben Gvir. One of the problems of the British government has been you have explained very well, very articulately, the British policy of not trying to offend the United States, of staying alongside our ally, but it's taken us in through a moral cesspit.
Let me just move us on to another part of your argument, Peter, which is why complicity in your framing has been acceptable in Britain, and the conversation that we've had around it, the way it's been framed, the way it's been reported in the media, and the way that we describe people and deaths on both sides. Why do you think it's been distorted and wrong?
I look at the conduct of the mainstream British media in the way that it's reported the events since October the 7th, and it's been shocking. I mean, the greater value attached to Israeli people who've been killed by Hamas, the Israelis, than the Palestinian.
Just explain why you think, how has that happened? You know, what are the examples, if you like?
The most desperate day of the war, 22 Israelis killed. Terrible. But, the same day, something like 200 Palestinians were killed. There's a basic racism about Western reporting. An Israeli person who's been killed, it's a terrible tragedy. I'm all for it. Give them a name, give them a job, explain what they were doing. Palestinian person who gets killed, doesn't matter. Let's look at the treatment of Palestinian journalists. More than 200, I think, according to the latest numbers, have been killed, many of them targeted. What attention has been given to that in the Western media? Very, very little. The targeting of aid workers, well over 300 UNRWA workers killed. Nobody notices.
All of these things have been reported, though, haven't they? I mean,
not really.
They've not been reported by name. We get whole biographies of the hostages that were held in Gaza from Israel. Whole biographies. You know their mums' faces. You know their families. You know what they did, their life story. People murdered by Israeli airstrikes in Gaza. Nameless. Storyless. Totally faceless to the people of the West. The only people that we actually know the fucking names of that get reported on in terms of the identities of those killed are Westerners. We know the names and faces of the aid workers assassinated from World Central Kitchen. The names of the Palestinians who were in those cars too? No, we don't. And indeed, yes, We have the difference between hostages in Gaza and prisoners held in Israel. Indeed, so much so is the groupthink and the whitewashing in that there is no desire to delineate between hostages, of which there are plenty, and prisoners of war, of which some of those referred to as hostages actually are, because they were IDF service people, active IDF service people.
Part of the conversation, it's part of the protest movement, it's part of all the activist conversation.
The protest movement has been largely ignored, and it's been systematically smeared by the British media. I have a chapter on this, about how the fabricated stories published all over the mainstream media, making out that they're terrorist supporters or Hamas supporters or anti-Semites or violent thugs. These protesters who've been walking through British streets week after week, protesting simply in favour of international law. They've been invited, they're on the same side as the United Nations, the International Court, Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, against war crimes and for peace.
How do you think where do you think the bias is in the framing of that? Because obviously people on Edmund's side of the argument tend to call those hate marches.
Well, exactly.
And describe it,
that is gross misrepresentation.
But that's not how the media tends to describe it.
No, the media bought. I've done one of my chapters. I look into this. I show how the media presented the marches as violence, and I show that in fact they were incredibly peaceful. And indeed, the far right marchers who disrupted, let's say, at the Cenotaph, they were a bit embarrassing for the media. The media doesn't like to pay attention to the fact of the extraordinary far right support which Israel's generated. Tommy Robinson, Nigel Farage, the fact that there's this coalition between the British government and the far right.
Disputes he's far right.
Well, I won't. I'm happy to say it's far right, I can assure you.
Can I please at least make the point? I do not associate with people like Tommy Robinson.
Yeah, but he's there. There he is in Israel at the invitation of the Israeli government, and that is a problem that you have. Very ugly forces in Western society supporting Israel as it slaughters Arabs in Gaza.
And again, we know why this is happening. Israel is deliberately promoting these people and funding these people specifically to weaponize anti-Islamic sentiment in the West to drive support for Israel in terms of how people vote in elections. To make people scared of radical Islamism and to view Israel as the Western bulwark against those people coming from the East. That has been the explicit Israeli strategy in terms of winning back support in the West, which has deteriorated to the lowest level basically ever, especially in the more modern era. A complete volte-face in terms of public support. Look at the base of the Democratic Party, the overwhelming supermajority of the Democratic Party's supporters base believes Israel has committed genocide. The support for the Palestinians is at an all-time high, and a record-breaking all-time high, higher than it's ever been by twice as much. And so Israel is trying to anti-Islamic feeling in the West to drive support for Israel. And that's why they promote Tommy Robinson. They are deliberately trying to bring down British societal cohesion. They're deliberately trying to stoke internal political tensions in our own country, the kind of political tensions that led to pogroms on our streets, racist riots on our streets, for their own geopolitical reasons. These people are evil. These people must be absolutely wrenched from the control of our political institutions.
The way it's been framed, do you think it's been fair?
I was surprised when we were preparing for this that this was a significant part of Peter's argumentation, because I would have thought that on this particular point about alleged media bias for Israel, I hadn't really heard that before. It's an unusual point of view. Now, for example,
because Israel's forces feel the media is against them.
I don't want to get into. I don't want all of us, whatever our point of view, we will always say that we feel that the media is not representing it properly. And I've talked a good deal to people in the BBC, and people in the BBC have said, we're attacked all the time for being pro-Israeli, and we're attacked all the time for being anti-Israeli, and we can only sort of surmise that we may be roughly in the right place.
Well, the issue is what's the actual veracity of those claims? And whilst I think that there are certain areas of the BBC who do a really good job, like Jeremy Bowen has been excellent in reporting on what's happening in Palestine, right? And he's certainly got a lot of ire from the pro-Zionist sectors of society, right? We have actual information about what's going on behind the scenes in terms of people who are in positions of power, like Robbie Gibb at the BBC and their ideological predilections. We had Owen Jones's report on what people were told they could and couldn't say internally as BBC journalists and BBC reporters and researchers, etc., in terms of what was and wasn't acceptable in the coverage of Israel, and were told to be more pro-Israel. Like, we don't have any of the same information when it's coming from the pro-Israel side who are trying to say the BBC is against Israel. What's the biggest thing that these people can come up with as their attack against the BBC for not being pro-Israel enough is that they refuse to call Hamas a terrorist organisation. It is against the BBC's constitution to do so. People might be shocked when I say this, but it's true, right? Calling somebody a terrorist organisation, or indeed calling them a terrorist, is an opinion of the government. You designate someone as a terrorist organisation by enacting legislation. It's why Palestine Action is prescribed. The government went to Parliament, here's a bill, MPs vote on it, and if it passes, then these groups become prescribed and they officially become terrorist organisations. So what it is, fundamentally, is an opinion of the legislature, right? It's an opinion that the legislature has codified into law. The BBC, in its constitution, is obliged to be non-partisan, and it is obliged to be not explicitly an arm of the government. It is a publicly funded broadcaster, not a state broadcaster, i.e. it's publicly funded, but it's supposed to be completely independent and not to take any side. If they said Hamas were a terrorist organisation prima facie, they would be reporting the opinion of the government as fact, which it is not, as an opinion. You can say, for example, that Hamas is prescribed as a terrorist organisation by the government. You would be reporting upon the opinion of the government, not reporting that the opinion of the government is fact. This is why it's really important to understand the complexities of this argument. Otherwise, you'll be able to do what this guy does and say, well, both sides are being critical, so we must be right. Well, what's the veracity of that criticism? And I would say people on the right, especially, who are too stupid to understand what the BBC is there to do, are not quite as reliable a critic as those who've done the kind of investigative journalism as Peter Oborne and Owen Jones. Didn't he go embedded with the IDF? I lost all respect for him then. Well, they have no choice. If they want to go and report from Gaza, the only way they're allowed in is if they go in with the IDF because Israel controls the territory. I won't bemoan anybody for taking the necessary steps that they need to do so to be able to report when they have no other choice, you know?
Now, I realise that's rather approximate, and it's maybe not a very scientific basis on which to make an argument. But I would say that in general, whether you feel that the media has lent slightly one way or the other, I think the argument that the media has been systematically pro-Israeli is eccentric.
It is striking. I mean, having just come back from Israel, and I know you've been there as well recently. I mean, I found with my TV cameras, people in Israel much more hostile towards British journalists, and particularly they would say, "Are you the BBC?" And when you say, "No, we're Channel 4," they say, "Okay, well, at least you're not the BBC." They think the BBC is against them.
And by the
Well, Channel 4 has been like the most pro-Palestinian. I mean, Christian Guru Murthy is kind of the absolute personification of that. Been the one who's been very vociferous in holding people like David Menzer, emotes in chat, to account. Very strange. Again, it's all just very weird to me that the BBC is the one that seems to be getting the ire here.
You're saying, well, actually, they were in favour.
Look, structurally they are, and I look forward to somebody rebutting. I put these points to BBC executives, the relevant BBC executives. They can't answer them.
Let's go beyond the BBC, because it's, they're not here to defend themselves, and they say that we're a public service broadcaster trying to get it right. But because your criticism really goes beyond that, isn't it? It's the whole conversation in most of the media that most of Britain reads and watches that you feel has been slanted and racist.
Yeah, and you can see that very graphic case in point over last weekend over the Maccabi fans and Aston Villa, where the Prime Minister intervened against police advice and has got a bloody nose for it politically because he's been proved to have been wrong. I mean, and the media coverage of that was fanatically, this is a free speech issue, this is a fairness issue, you've got to let the Maccabi fans into Britain, even though they're known for their genocidal chants and their violence and death to Arabs and all the rest of it. And the media cast that as went after an MP called Ayub Khan, who'd been calling for Maccabi fans to be banned. It was a racist campaign against Ayub Khan. I saw one remark by a shock jock saying he should go back to Pakistan. This is on a respectable channel.
He's been suspended.
Thank God for that. But I mean, and that was a very clear example. I think one of the arguments I do make in this book is the far right fascist Islamophobic arguments being made for Israel and allies that the pro-Israel side has got. And Starmer, in my view, and it's shaming in a British Prime Minister, was, as part of Labour's strategy to win over the Red Wall voters, win back the voters who've gone to reform from Labour, actually basically doing what they wanted, appealing to them by siding against Ayub Khan and with Maccabi fans.
Edmund, what's your view on that?
I mean, I don't want to get deep into the
Well, Lisa and Andy, in my opinion, just totally misled the House. It was very clear from the information that was given by West Midlands Police was that their main concern was the violence of Maccabi Tel Aviv fans, and not indeed the threat that the Muslims of Birmingham, even though that was the main concern the media talked about when it wasn't.
and Villa thing, it's again, it feels to me as if it's a little bit off the subject. But
generally, you feel bemused that you think that the media is being described as pro-Israel.
Precisely, yes. I just don't see it. I mean, I see in some areas I see balance. I think I see some areas where I definitely see a very anti-Israeli bent. I'm not sure where I see the pro-Israeli bent, but I can believe that it might exist in some.
Wow, guy who is incredibly personally biased to Israel can't see bias to Israel and other people. Tale as old as time.
Newspapers, but I would have thought on balance.
Try reading the Times. What about it's extraordinary. You read the Telegraph, and you don't think it's pro-Israeli. I mean, it's very odd, actually, the mental outlook you're betraying.
So, as a matter of fact, I don't particularly read the Telegraph, and if you say it's pro-Israeli...
Try reading the Spectator, old boy, or the Times.
But these are outlets that are open about their position. There's nothing wrong with that.
And they're private outlets as well. I mean, let's go back to the BBC. The BBC is under pressure over justifying the licence fee and what that implies in terms of its obligations to the British people. And they're walking a tightrope. And I don't think they always get it right, but I don't think they get it systematically wrong.
I'm afraid they do, and they've systematically kept from their audiences vital information for the understanding of how this war has progressed.
Finally, Peter, I mean, you built a case in your book which is basically arguing our politicians, our political decisions, our media, our national conversation makes us complicit as a nation in what has happened in Gaza. What are you hoping people will do as a result of reading that?
Well, one of the things which is very hard to remember is that the vast majority of the British people are decent people. Right from the outset of this conflict, the majority of the British people have been for a ceasefire. They have been for the rule of law. I think now I have made a case in this conversation, but much more thoroughly in the book, that British ministers have been complicit in what is likely to be judged to be a genocide. I hope that these ministers will be brought to justice. There must be accountability. I don't believe that Britain should support barbaric policies, whether our friends the Saudis in the Yemen or the Israelis in Gaza. I think we should be a force for good in the world. We should respect international institutions like the International Criminal Court, the United Nations, and have a foreign policy which is a force for good in the world, not for one which is a force for violence, mayhem, chaos, and law-breaking. You'd
agree with that?
Well said.
I would agree that is what we should do. I would also claim that is exactly what we already do. I mean, I think we're into concluding points, aren't we? Let me just make a couple of points. One is that, because I haven't said it explicitly, let me say explicitly that I am no apologist for Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm not here to defend him, and there are many problems
could have fooled me.
That I have with the way that he has approached Israeli national security over recent years. The second thing I should say, just because it's an honest disclosure, is that although I've in a way sort of been cast here as someone who will defend the actions of the British government itself would not be terribly happy with that, because I no longer work for the British government. I'm no longer a British ambassador, and I'm not under any obligation to defend them if I didn't agree with what they were doing. So, you know, I'm not giving British propaganda here. I don't have to, and I don't even want to. But I would argue that the British government over the past, well, let's say for as long as I have been involved in foreign policy, and that would be going back to the 1980s, I would say that the British government of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, which is to say, obviously, France, China, Soviet Union, then Russia, and the United States, I would say the British government has most consistently factored in values into its understanding of its interests and the policies that it has pursued. And it doesn't always get it right, but I am generally proud of the way the British government has approached most international issues.
I think that there have been plenty of cases of the UK being on the right side of history with a bunch of these concerns. The issue, of course, is that the one exception has always been Israel. Like, Israel has always been the people who get away with it. Like, their occupation of Palestine has always been illegal. We have always supported it. We have never called out the illegal settlements that have always been illegal. We've always supported it. We have never called out the institutions that engage, that support, that fund those illegal settlements, right? We allow these people to run companies that drill oil in Rosebank. Like, we have been ultimately complicit for so long with what Israel does. And I guess fundamentally because it's our fault, because of the Balfour Declaration. Now, whilst I can certainly think of plenty of times where we have been on the right side of history in the last 40 years or so, 45 years or so, right? This cannot be the case. This must not be the case. And it has never been the case that our support for Israel has been warranted or has been justified or has been a force for good in the world, because it just hasn't. True, I mean, you look at Iraq and Afghanistan, also very true, you know.
Edmund Fitton-Brown, Peter Oborne, we must leave it there. Thank you both very much. And that's it for this episode of The Forecast. Until next time, bye-bye.